hi again, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Schwartz on Sports here at New York Sports Day. I'm Peter Schwartz. Thanks for joining us on this edition of the podcast. The Islanders into round 2 of the playoffs and ready to come home for games 3 and 4 on Thursday and Saturday at the Coliseum against the Boston Bruins, with the series tied at 1. And on the line with me to talk about the playoffs so far for the Islanders and what might lie ahead is the radio voice, the longtime radio voice and a great friend of mine for a long time, Chris King, the voice of the Islanders, joins me here on the podcast. Chris, it's Peter. How are you?
I'm doing great, Peter. How are you?
Doing great, and obviously this has been a lot of fun again here so far for the second postseason in a row. Actually, the third postseason in a row, the Islanders winning a first-round match, but now into the second round, and this has been, a terrific matchup here with the Bruins so far through, the first 2 games in Boston. What was it like for you being in Boston at the Garden watching those first 2 games?
It was a return to normalcy, Peter. That's like the best way I can put it, because up until then, we really hadn't been in a building either at home or on the road all year that was completely full, and it was finally in Boston. I mean, the capacity of TD Garden is 17,850, and they put 17,400 in, so it was only 450 seats that weren't occupied, and those were just the areas behind the benches and behind the penalty boxes that the NHL still mandates must be tarped off. So you've got the 2 tarps on each side, but otherwise every single seat in TD Garden was full for both games 1 and game 2, and I had to almost yell at times just to hear myself above the noise. So it was tremendous atmosphere. They're so passionate there about all their sports teams, and I think they had waited a long time to fill that building as well, and they'd only been at 25% capacity for their 2 home games against Washington. So they went from 4,000 fans in the Caps games to 17,400 for the Islander games, and it was just a release of, hey, hockey is back, normalcy, quote unquote, is back, and Bruins hockey is back, and it's a great blue collar team, much like the Islanders are, and their fans just absolutely adore them, and it was a madhouse. It was an absolute madhouse for 2 nights, but I wouldn't have it any other way, and it felt like playoff hockey should feel, as opposed to the great run the Islanders had a year ago. But that's in a Toronto bubble and an Edmonton bubble where nobody was in the building at all.
Yeah, I'm sure you couldn't wait to get out of the Hofstra studios. Not that you didn't like it there, but you couldn't wait. You couldn't wait to get back to being in the visiting arenas. I know you were at some of the local visiting arenas during the season, but not that the people at Hofstra are great. I didn't mean it to sound that way, but I'm sure it felt great to be on the road with the team again.
It really did, and again, you make a great point, Peter. It's no slight against Hofstra whatsoever. It's just that you think about the contrast of sitting in front of a TV monitor in an empty studio, which is what we did for all 22 playoff games a year ago, versus going to the Coliseum number 1 for home games, which is off the charts exciting, and then going into a building like Boston. And again, it's not just the excitement and the emotion; it's also from a technical standpoint, as just a play-by-play guy. It is so hard to call a game off a screen when all you're seeing is what the director wants you to see, and you can't look away from the puck, essentially. There are times during a broadcast I need to look in the other end of the rink. I need to see, are the Bruins pulling their goal lead in the final minute? And you don't see that on a TV screen,
right,
because they're showing you the attacking end, right? And I need to see a trailing referee calling a penalty. I need to see a guy joining a 2-on-1 to make it a 3-on-1. And those were all the challenges of, trying to call a game off a monitor, things that you just couldn't see because you were limited to just whatever the director wanted to show you. And now, again, I'm back to, watching benches during whistles so I can see line changes occurring and little things like that maybe fans don't realize are a big part of technically what I have to do as a play-by-play guy.
We're talking Islanders radio voice Chris King here on Schwartz on Sports at New York Sports Day. Islanders getting ready for Game 3 of the second-round playoff series against the Bruins Thursday night at the Coliseum. Before we look ahead to Games 3 and 4, I'm going to look back with you on Games 1 and 2, and we'll start with Game 1, which was right there for the Islanders taking, early in the third period. They had gotten the game tied at 2, and then they have that power play early in the third, and they didn't really do anything with it at all. And then the Bruins come right back down. They take the lead and put the game away. I know the Islanders were happy to get Game 2, but when they look back on Game 1, there were certainly some missed opportunities for them to try and steal Game 1 in Boston, too.
Yeah, it's a great point, Peter. And, you look at the final score, you say 5-2. Wow, they kind of got blown out, but it wasn't a tough game at all. And I thought you made a great point there. Barry Trotz, pointed to that as the turning point of the game. It's 2-2 going into the third. The Bruins take a bench minor for too many men on the ice. 4 minutes into the period, the Islanders have a power play with a chance to take the lead. They don't do anything on it. And 18 seconds after the bench minor was over, the Bruins' Charlie McAvoy scores that goal that proved to be the game winner. So that's, obviously the turning point in the game, and they do tack on 2 more later. But it was there for the taking. It was tied after 40 minutes. It was a 1-goal game with 6 minutes to go in it. So it was there for the taking. They really did get it taken to them as far as that Bruins top line in that game when you're talking about the perfection line having 6 points in the game and even more impressive, maybe 19 shots on goal.
Yeah.
So, Ilya Sorokin suffers his first loss of the playoffs, but, credit to the Islanders and Barry Trotz. Had a very difficult decision as to what to do in goal. Did decide to go to Semyon Varlamov, who was terrific in Game 2, and did decide not to juggle his lines, which he indicated he might do, and that worked out for him as well. So, a real nice bounce-back effort in Game 2, and everybody obviously feels great for Casey Cizikas, one of the most, beloved Islanders, and not considered a big-time goal scorer, but coming up with one of the biggest goals, for the team, and certainly the biggest goal he's ever scored in 10 years now in the blue and orange.
Yeah, it's funny that I was going to ask you about it in a second. Well, now you mentioned Cizikas' game-winning goal in overtime. I'm sitting there watching it on television, and all I can think about are over the last couple of years the amount of breakaways the Islanders have had, in the playoffs, and they didn't get any of them to fall through. Brock Nelson had the one in overtime of Game 6 against the Lightning, and earlier in the game or the other night, Barzal had a breakaway that could have kind of put that game away before they let the lead slip away. So it was nice. It was nice to see an Islander score a goal on a breakaway in the playoffs.
It's a great point, and the one you mentioned, I know that still sticks with me to this day, is the Brock Nelson one in the Tampa series in Game 6. Obviously, the Islanders, win Game 5 in double overtime on that great Lita Everly goal, that keeps the season alive. And then it's overtime in Game 6. There, a Brock Nelson breakaway goal away from taking Tampa to Game 7, but he was unable to finish. And obviously the Lightning did in overtime, and the Islanders season came to an end. So, yeah, it was terrific to see Casey do what he did. And for me, it was almost nerve-wracking, Peter, because it was such a long breakaway. I mean, he picked off that pass at his own blue line, so he's got over 100 feet to just skate it alone on Tuukka Rask.
Yeah, I was hoping he wouldn't. I was hoping he wouldn't run out of gas.
It's true, right? Because at the end of a shift, you know how hard he works, right? But, I mean, it literally, you realize what a big moment it is from the minute you see that, look, he's going to get in and he's going to get a chance at this. So I literally, jumped out of my seat just on the breakaway. So now I'm on my feet just anticipating, might this be the end to the game? And luckily he gave us the happy ending, making an absolutely great shot. It's late in the overtime, so give him credit for not even attempting to deke on, a chopped up ice surface at that point, and just really picking that upper left corner over the blocker of Tuukka Rask, and the celebration was on. And I mean, you always get a great celebration when you win in overtime, but because it was Casey and how beloved he is in that room for, all the other things he does, like blocking shots and killing penalties and sacrificing his body, I think it meant a lot more to all those guys in the room to have a guy like Cizikas get that goal.
Just on a personal note, I'm watching the overtime with my son Jared, and by the way, today is his birthday, and when Casey Cizikas scores the goal, he turns to me after he started jumping up and down. He said, "There's no question, your friend Chris just lost his voice."
Well, Jared's a smart boy. Happy birthday, Jared, and he knows. Yeah, that's not something I can control, and it just happens. I get excited, my voice goes up, and there was just so much going on in that moment because it was an overtime winner, and it was a tied series, and it was stealing home ice, and they were coming back to the island, and you want to get all that in on the call. So I ran out of air just on the goal. I kind of had to regroup and get that last part out. But no, tell Jared thank you very much, Jared. He knows my style, and there's nothing I can do to control it. It is what it is, and I when I hear from fans, Peter, they say, we can hear the energy, the emotion, the excitement, that we have as fans, in your voice, and that's the way, I prefer it to be, because it truly is that. Is you and I are people who both have followed this franchise since day one, so this is not something like a team that I went to work for and it's a job. It's a team I've been invested in since I was 11 years old, and they arrived on Long Island just like it has been for you. And
that perfectly leads into my next question. We're talking to Chris King, a longtime radio voice of the Islanders, and the Islanders getting ready for games 3 and 4 at the Coliseum on Thursday and Saturday against the Bruins. I've been thinking about this all week, and I knew I wanted to talk to you about it because we've talked about this off the air, and I've talked about it with my kids, who obviously are still learning about a lot of Islanders history and things like that. And now that there's going to be a pretty close to a full house for these two games coming up, games 3 and 4 at the Coliseum, I've been thinking a lot about what was the loudest I've ever recalled the Coliseum for an Islanders game. And I went to a handful of games in the playoffs back in the Dynasty, but I don't think the crowds were ever as loud as they've been during this era. And I'm talking about going back to the 93 playoffs and maybe even starting in 2002. As I think this has been something about the fan base in this era that it has made it louder in that building. And for me, I think the loudest, and can't wait to hear what you think about it, the loudest I've heard the building, I feel, for an Islanders game, especially in the playoffs, was the Sean Bates penalty shot against the Maple Leafs in the playoffs a number of years ago. So I just was curious because it's been off the charts loud through the playoffs, in past years. What do you think the loudest has ever been in the Coliseum, and you think we have a chance to unseat that this year?
Yeah, the 93 playoffs, I would put that up there because, again, I was there for all those home games, and that was incredible, the run they went on and what they were able to do, obviously, against Washington and then against Pittsburgh, and especially all those overtime wins against Washington in that series, and then what happened in the Penguins series, obviously. So I would put that up there, but I do go back to the Sean Bates penalty shot. Obviously, Game 4 against Toronto in 2002, Islanders lost both in Toronto. Game 3, they came home. I'll even throw Game 3 in there because if you remember, that's the one where Steve Webb was the number one star of the game, everything in sight the entire night, didn't have a single point, but still got named the game's number one star because he took the momentum back from the Islanders side. They won that one, and then obviously the Bates penalty shot in the closing minutes, ties the series at 2-2. I will give you that, for sure, that Bates penalty shot moment. And then one that, maybe people forget, but I don't, and it was just, I think, because of the sustained roar, was the return of Al Arbor in 2007.
Yeah.
That was a game against the Penguins. They were down 2-1 into the third. Miro Shatan ties it. Miro Shatan gives them the lead, the roar on that lead, and then just the final minute when you realize, look, this is the last time Al Arbor is ever going to stand behind that bench. And it's an unbelievable moment. It just is. And, they're going to win this game if they can hang on, and they did. And then the celebration afterwards on the ice when his family's out there and his players are out there and they're bringing up the banner. And that, to me, Peter, especially, I put that in a different category because regular season games really don't come back to you too much because there's so many of them every year. But that may be, the loudest I've ever heard it in a regular season game was Al Arbor night. And I would give you the Bates penalty shot as maybe the loudest I've heard it in the playoffs. But you know what? I think now that it's on the final run, right, these are the final Stanley Cup playoff games that will ever be played at Nassau Coliseum. There's no doubt about that. I can't wait to see what it's going to be like Thursday and Saturday for these Bruin games when you're talking now 13,000, which is what we're hearing capacity is going to be.
And there's so much, kept in emotion that fans have had for a year, back in the playoffs, over the summer in the bubble. I mean, really, they were relegated to, small viewing parties as was allowed by any of the local ordinances, and drive-through events that the Islanders put on, and then they start this season with nobody in the building. It creeps up a little bit to 10%, and now what we've seen in the playoffs, and there's just been so much kept in, energy from the fans. And I'm looking forward to feeling and seeing and hearing what it's going to be like tomorrow night, for Game 3. I think it's going to be as close to anything we have seen for an Islander playoff game in recent memory.
Yeah, I think you're right, and that's a great point, too, right? This pent-up energy, and, you talk about the 10% and then it creeping up, and it got to 9,000 for that clincher over the Penguins, which was amazing. But now you're talking, 4,000 more if they can get to 13. And you think about it, those are probably fans who haven't been in that building in over 14 months since everything shut down in March of 2020. So, that's a lot of pent-up energy if you haven't been inside the Coliseum in 14 months. So maybe those extra 4,000 fans, they're going to bump it from 9,000 to 13,000. Maybe that's their first time back in. For many of them, I'm sure it will be. So it's going to be unbelievable. And the fact that they've stolen home ice, made it a best of 5 now with 3 at the Coliseum, they know they can win the series without having to win in Boston again. So, they got to try to do that to win both home games. Certainly here, they didn't do that in the Penguins series, and still found a way because they won Game 5 in Pittsburgh and then clinched at home in Game 6. But if they can take these 2 from the Bruins and go up 3-1, then they're kind of playing with house money in Beantown in Game 5, knowing they're coming home with a chance to win it in Game 6. So, you know, you steal that home ice advantage. You want to keep that home ice advantage. The Penguins got it back. The Islanders found a way to win the series, but they don't want to give it back to the Bruins here in these next two.
Two things I think that the Islanders have to feel good about heading into Game 3. Number one, the 2 power play goals in Game 2, and that power play has been an ongoing saga for the Islanders, especially going back to the playoffs last year. But I thought the power play has looked better, not so much really in Game 1, but in Game 2, the power play looked a lot better. And I think obviously in the playoffs, I mean, special teams is so important. But for me, I think the power play getting better and starting to spark a little bit, to me, is a good sign going into Game 3.
Huge. And you make up the point, Peter. You know, everybody talks about Stanley Cup playoff hockey. Sometimes it's special teams and goaltending, and I think you might be heading to goaltending next, but we'll stay on special teams because, yeah, it's been really good. And I gave this stat on the air Tuesday, Game 2 in Boston. In the Penguin series, the Islanders only scored 3 power play goals in the 6 games. They've already scored 3 power play goals in the first 2 games now against the Bruins, as Beauvillier had one in the opening period of Game 1, and then in that second period of Game 2, Bailey and Pajot had the power play goals, and Palmieri had scored in between at even strength. So anytime you can have a 2 power play goal period, you know, that's tremendous. And obviously, you know, we talked already about that missed power play chance in Game 1 to start the third period of a tie game. That came back to haunt them. So if they were able to get one there, maybe they win that one as well. But, you know, you and I were just on a conference call where I asked Ryan Pulock about it, and he said it's all about confidence. It's all about confidence when you can score on the man advantage, and suddenly, bang, you're getting 2 in a single period. That's got to do wonders for them. You know, they come home, that power play on home ice could be a huge factor in, you know, hoping that they are able to win both games at the Coliseum. And if they can win the special teams battle, chances are they're going to win the game itself.
My second point, and goaltending does have something to do with it because obviously the Islanders have 2 goalies that they trust, you know, a whole lot in making big saves, you know, Varlamov and Sorokin. But the point being is I thought in Game 2 they did a much better job defending the Bruins' perfection line, even though, you know, they let the lead slip away in the third period. I think they did a much better job containing them. The biggest issue for me in terms of containing that line is are the goalies getting a clear view of the puck? And there were a couple of times where, you know, the goalie was screened, and that's when they gave up a couple of goals. But to me, I thought they did a much better job in Game 2 on the perfection line, and that obviously is a huge factor for the Islanders if they are to go on and win the series.
Yeah, two really good points, Peter, and I agree with you. If you look back at Game 1, okay, the Sorokin goals, the 4 he gave up, the first 2 were huge rebounds that he gave up in Pasternak, you know, pots them both. The last 2 were screenshots. I don't think he ever saw anyone, you know, saw it at all on the screens at all. So they took his eyes away on the last 2. He kind of didn't help himself with those big rebounds on the first 2, and then obviously they hit the empty net. Even in the win, Barry Trotz said, hey, look, at 3-1, you know, the Islanders had a couple of open nets that they missed. Anthony Beauvillier, the big one, a completely wide open net that he missed. And then in the third period, I don't think that Semyon Varlamov sees the Bergeron shot or sees the Marchand shot because, again, he's screened. So, you know, the Islanders have to do a better job of getting out of the way of those shots or, you know, it could be a different series. But, yeah, they were a lot better defensively on that perfection line. The perfection line had 6 points and 19 shots on goal in Game 1. In Game 2, they still had 4 points. They did have 11 shots on goal, but it just felt like a lot less. It just didn't feel like they dominated, whereas in Game 1, every time they were on the ice, you knew it. It was a different game for the other 3 lines for the Bruins. It really was. But that line took over the game every time they touched the ice. And let's not forget, too, now, home ice advantage. You know, Barry Trotz can get those matchups much easier at the Coliseum when he sees Bruce Cassidy put out that top line. Well, then he gets the counter and put out, you know, Pelican Pulock and whichever line he chooses to match up with up front. So he did say, Barry did just when asked about that Bruce will probably change on the fly to try to get away from those pairings. But, you know, there's a reason it's called home ice advantage. Yeah. And Barry is going to have that last change Thursday and Saturday. And Barry
did, as he has normally done during these playoff games before the home games, he's called on the fans to do what they do best, and that was bring the noise. And he's got – I'll tell you something. I said this on social media. I'm sure you've seen it because I've tweeted it and I put it on Facebook. Whatever the Islanders are paying Barry Trotz, whatever they signed him for before, the season 3 years ago. It's not enough. He has been so important for this franchise. I mean, to me, it's probably splitting hairs if he's the best coach in the NHL because there are some really good ones around the league. But if there was ever a perfect coach to come along at the right time for this franchise, man, has it been Barry? Because not only has he provided the Islanders with the right structure on the ice, but just a great ambassador for the franchise with how he talks about the history of the team and how he's resonated with the fans. I mean, he's the perfect coach at the perfect time for this franchise to where it's going.
Yeah, I agree with you, Peter. And I put Lou in that category, too, because, when they both came over, he and Lou Lamoriello together, it did change the culture and it changed the franchise. And I use this one stat to emphasize the difference pre-Barry and Lou and post-Barry and Lou, and this is the one to me that drives the point home. In the 25 years prior to Lou and Barry arriving, the Islanders won one playoff series, 2016 against the Florida Panthers. That's it in a 25-year span. In the 3 years that Lou and Barry have been running the Islanders operation, they've won 5 playoff series now, 5, and they're trying to take a 6th. So that just shows what change at the top can do. And the other thing you bring up about Barry that I really love is we're starting to see that personality come out. You're talking about pumping up the fans. He's telling them, hey, I want you out there at 1 o'clock getting ready. He's pumping up Borelli's in his post-game show. I saw the video from Borelli's, and I never forget the answer he gave me to a question. I think it was the first year where when the Islanders swept the Penguins, I said, are you getting more attention now when you get seen around Long Island? He said, well, I'll tell you this. He goes, I have never gotten high fives in Home Depot like I have of late. That's a great line. So, we're starting to see that personality come out. And, he said during the one recent press conference, I'm talking to Governor Cuomo to say, open up the building, let them all in,
I like the fact that Barry shops in Home Depot. He does it all himself.
He does. He doesn't look like a Home Depot guy, though. Come on. He looks like a do-it-yourself.
Yeah.
That was a great line. I'm getting high fives in Home Depot, and that, to me, drove home the point. But, and the other point, too, Peter, that you bring up that I think sometimes gets forgotten, the way he has embraced the history of this team. Let's face it, there are not a lot of coaches who are going to embrace, what has happened in the past. They're going to say, hey, it's about the present, let's move on. No, he is welcoming those alumni along with the ownership of the Islanders. They've all returned to the fold, and he just cherishes what, the past means to the fan base, what it means to the alumni, and what it means to the older, fans of the current group of New York Islanders. There's no doubt about it. He constantly brings up the dynasty years and the incredible things that those clubs accomplished.
Last year, I think it was the training camp when they came back before the playoffs started. And for people who don't know, when the Islanders practice, they utilize both rinks at Northwell Health Ice Center. They usually start at the Al Arbor rink and they move over to the Bill Torrey rink. And when they moved over during one of the practices, and I like to take a lot of pictures, and people who follow me on social media, they certainly know that and see that. But, Chris, there was a moment in one of those practices where Barry is up against the glass on the far end from where we can watch practice, and the timing couldn't have been more perfect. He is literally standing on the ice right underneath the Al Arbor banner. And I took a picture of him, and it's like, it's just a perfect, metaphor, and just the irony of, like, I'm sure Al Arbor's got to be thrilled looking down and seeing how this franchise has begun to turn it around, and I'm sure he's proud of the job that Barry Trotz has done, with the Islanders these last 3 years.
And he is smiling down from above. There's no doubt about it, Peter. And that's why I love that recent stat that the NHL dug out that, Barry's won a playoff series now in 7 straight seasons. The last coach to do that was Al Arbor with the New York Islanders in the late 70s and the early 80s. So just, anytime you can put Barry alongside Al, you have to do it. And obviously Barry's going immediately into the Hall of Fame as soon as his career ends, and he'll join Al there. So, they are very similar guys in the way they coach and certainly the way they understand that sometimes, knowing the person is more important than, the X's and O's, and getting, to find out what motivates that particular person. And Barry knows everything about his players, from their families to, what they like to do away from the rink, all that type of stuff. He is so much more than an X's and O's coach, and I'm just glad we're starting to see that personality come out a little bit now as well.
I say this every time you're on the podcast. I mean, we could talk Islanders hockey for hours if we had the time, but we don't. But we don't, so we'll have to do it off the air when we see each other in person. I can't thank you enough, and it's been a great run so far into the second round. Looking forward to even more. Have a great call tomorrow night for Game 3, and then Saturday night for Game 4 at the Coliseum. Looking forward to seeing you at the barn.
Oh, thanks so much, Peter. Always great talking Islanders hockey with you, but even better when it's Stanley Cup playoff Islanders hockey.
Absolutely. Chris King, longtime radio voice of the New York Islanders, my guest. Islanders and the Bruins Game 3 at the Coliseum on Thursday night at 7:30. I'm Peter Schwartz. Thanks for listening to this edition of Schwartz on Sports here at New York Sports Day. We'll catch you again next time, and please stay safe, everyone.